Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain Law-Abiding Citizen. This movie tells the story of a frustrated man who decides to take justice into his own hands after a plea bargain sets one of his family's killers free. He then started various assassinations to avenge the death of his family. Will he be able to do it, even when he is in prison? Let's find out in Law-Abiding Citizen. Law-Abiding Citizen tells about Clyde Alexander Shelton, an engineer who lives happily with his wife and daughter in Philadelphia. However, one night, their house was raided by two robbers, Clarence Darby and Rupert Ames. In truth, Ames only intended to rob the Shelton family's valuables and run away. However, Darby had other plans. After they hit Clyde with a baseball bat, Darby tied Clyde's hands and stabbed him in the stomach. The cruelty did not stop there. He also forces Clyde to see how his wife and child were killed. Clyde himself could do nothing to save his family. In the end, the pain from the stab in the stomach knocked Clyde down. The robbery apparently did not go smoothly. A few days later, Darby and Ames were arrested. Prior to the Ames and Darby trial, Clyde met with a lawyer, Nicholas Rice, nicknamed Nick. He handed over the notes he had made regarding the robberies and murders committed by Ames and Darby. Clyde, of course, wanted Ames and Darby to be punished severely for the crimes they had committed. Unfortunately, Nick's explanation of the case undermines Clyde's hopes. Nick explains that the evidence they have is insufficient to prosecute Darby and Ames. Moreover, Darby has hired a lawyer who can strengthen his defense. On the other hand, even if Clyde insisted on continuing to sue Darby and Ames, the result would be futile. Clyde would lose a lot of money and time over the course of a year, while Darby and Ames might end up being acquitted in the end. Nick then explained that he had made an agreement with Darby and his lawyer. Ames will be charged with robbery and murder. So Ames will face a heavier sentence, while Darby will be charged with murder with a maximum sentence of 5 years. The explanation infuriated Clyde. He insisted he witnessed firsthand what Darby and Ames had done to his family, and he saw their faces clearly. Even so, Nick remains adamant that Clyde's testimony is insufficient without evidence. Finally, Nick said that this is how justice works. The disappointment that Clyde felt was growing when the trial was held. As expected, the judge said that there was not enough evidence to incriminate Ames and Darby's sentences. Even so, Ames was decided to be sentenced to 10 years in prison, before finally being sentenced to death. On the other hand, Darby was only sentenced to 5 years in prison. Clyde was furious at the verdict. He felt betrayed, not only by the justice system, but also by Nick. Moreover, after the trial was over and Nick was giving information to the media, Darby approached him to thank him. They shook hands, and Darby said they couldn't fight fate in the end. Nick, who was confused by Darby's words, didn't realize that Clyde was watching from afar. 10 years later, Ames is preparing to undergo the execution of the death penalty, which will be carried out by lethal injection. The execution process was also witnessed by Nick along with officers and court officials. The syringe was prepared, and Ames was already lying on the ground, ready to receive the end of his sentence. However, the process of executing Ames, which should be painless, actually works the other way around. Ames was seen in so much pain after the injection that he died in a horrific state. The events of Ames' execution were finally investigated. A vial of medicine was found and allegedly as evidence of murder at Ames' execution. The words "can't fight fate" on the bottle point to Darby. The police immediately went to Darby's house. On the other hand, Darby, who happened to be at home, got a call from an unknown person. The person said that the police were heading to his house. Darby was initially hesitant until the caller mentioned the illegal drugs he was taking and the presence of an underage woman in Darby's apartment. The mysterious caller even threatened Darby that he would be sentenced to life in prison. Darby had little choice but to follow the mysterious caller's words. The caller instructs Darby to take the police car, in which there is already a paralyzed officer. When Darby finds a police car, he threatens the officer with a gun to drive him to an empty warehouse. Upon arrival at the warehouse, the police officer reveals his identity as Clyde. Darby attempts to kill Clyde using the gun he took from the police car. Unbeknownst to him, the gun had a needle that had been smeared with tetrodotoxin. The poison made Darby unable to move, although he was still conscious and could feel pain. His condition was exactly the same as that of Clyde on the night of the robbery. Clyde then took Darby into the barn. He tied Darby to the table and started dismembering Darby's body parts one by one. The whole process was recorded by Clyde. When the police found Darby's dismembered body, it was not difficult for them to link it to Clyde, especially since the warehouse where the crime occurred was owned by Clyde. The police then went to Clyde at his home, where he turned himself in without a fight. During the search, the police also found that for the past 10 years, Clyde had studied the law in depth. In prison, Clyde asks Nick for a new mattress. The request would be exchanged for an honest confession from Clyde. Nick initially refuses the request until he discovers that Clyde is terrorizing his family with a video of him torturing and killing Darby. Having no choice, Nick gives a new mattress to Clyde. The mattress, of course, brought the envy of the other inmates, especially from Clyde's cellmate. However, even after his request was fulfilled, Clyde still did not give an honest confession in court. Clyde, who refused to use the services of a lawyer, defended himself before a judge. He said that the court did not have full evidence to convict him of murder. The judge also agreed with Clyde's defense and intended to sentence him to acquittal. However, hearing the verdict from the judge, Clyde applauded and insulted the court. He said this is why the law cannot be enforced. Although initially supposed to be acquitted, Clyde in the end remained imprisoned for insulting the court and judge. After that, Clyde again meets with Nick to make a deal. This time he asked for lunch with a delicious steak menu and an iPod to listen to music. The request this time will be exchanged for the location of Darby's attorney. Nick again refused, although he finally changed his mind after learning that Darby's lawyer had been missing for 3 days. Once again, Nick is forced to comply with Clyde's request. Clyde had his lunch delivered at exactly 1 p.m. However, due to the security system in the prison, Clyde's lunch was 8 minutes late. When his lunch finally arrived, Clyde told him the location where his lawyer Darby had been held hostage, which was apparently less than 15 minutes from the prison. Unfortunately, as soon as Nick and the police officers arrived at the location, the lawyer was found dead. The lawyer is locked in a bunker with oxygen supplies that will run out at exactly 1 p.m. and 15 minutes. If Clyde's lunch hadn't been too late, the lawyer might still have been saved. On the other hand, Clyde was enjoying lunch sharing his steak with his cellmate. But surprisingly, after eating, Clyde kills his cellmate with the leftover steak bone. Clyde was eventually thrown into solitary confinement. District Attorney Jonas Cantrell and Nick, working on the case, believe that Clyde had a partner who helped him carry out the murder. They then conduct an investigation until they meet a former CIA agent. He explained that Clyde used to work for the CIA. In his explanation, he mentions that Clyde can kill anyone even though he is in prison. It's not even impossible if his presence in prison is now part of Clyde's plan. The former CIA agent advises Nick and Cantrell to kill Clyde to stop his actions. Sure enough, Clyde's action still hasn't stopped. Next, he blows up the cars used by Nick's assistant, killing all aboard. Nick was furious now. He goes to Clyde in his cell and beats him up, before asking him to stop his murderous attacks. Nick then hands him a beaded bracelet that Clyde's daughter had made, saying that his wife and son wouldn't want to see him become a murderer. However, Clyde denied Nick. After all, Clyde's wife and children couldn't feel anything anymore because they were already dead. After the funeral of a colleague and assistant who was killed in a car bomb, Cantrell is attacked with a machine gun until a bomb falls on Cantrell's car and kills him. Things get so out of control that Nick finally prepares to back off. He chose to retire. However, before Nick could make that decision, news of Clyde's attack had already spread. The mayor finally chooses to increase security and appoints Nick as district attorney so he has full power to stop Clyde's actions. The investigation continues, mainly because the police and Nick believe that Clyde had someone's help to carry out the attack while he was incarcerated. The investigation leads to a bomb in a briefcase that Clyde placed under the meeting room at the town hall, right where the mayor was going to have an impromptu meeting. Fortunately, the bomb was successfully defused. A series of evidence also shows that Clyde apparently has a workshop not far from the prison. Nick searches the workshop until he finds a tunnel that connects to a series of cell rooms, including the solitary cell Clyde is in. Clyde, who was at the workshop at the time, was shocked to witness the bomb in the town hall that didn't explode. He then returns to the cell through the tunnel, where he meets Nick. Nick said that this time he would no longer make deals with him. He also tried to get Clyde to change his view, but to no avail. Finally, he left the cell, just as the bomb case he had been moving under the bed exploded. Before being engulfed in flames, Clyde looked at the beaded bracelet his daughter had made. The film closes with Nick attending the stage of his daughter's musical, which he has not been able to watch for a long time. The film ends. Law-abiding citizen not only shows how intelligent and clever Clyde is in designing murder-for-kill scenarios, even though he is not at the location. This film also shows the justice system, which is not in favor of justice.